Well, today is World Health Day, a day set aside for global health awareness, and being celebrated at a time of pandemic highlights the importance of adequate health care to the growth of any economy. And when it comes to health care, of course, Nigeria is lagging its comparable African neighbors in terms of expenditure and, of course, access. And so this day brings to mind how investment can be driven in the healthcare system. And joining us now to talk more about this is the chairman, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry Medical Group, Dr. Niyi Oshamiluyi. Thank you very much
Thank
for joining us.
Thank you so much, Chimeze and Imi, for having me this morning.
Thank you for joining us.
All right, today is World Health Day. Before you, what does this mean, particularly as the world deals with the coronavirus pandemic?
Thank you again for having me. So the theme for this year is building a fairer and healthier world. And in the context of COVID-19, you find people, there were lockdowns. There are people that are disproportionately affected by these lockdowns. You find out that people, because of where they live, where they are born, they have challenges with healthcare. So World Health Organization, WHO, is saying, our leaders, how can you make their lives better? Access to education, better housing, because all these social factors, they're social determinants of health, they influence the health of people. So that's pretty much what WHO is doing for World Health Day 2021.
Well, obviously, like you said, with COVID-19, it became more obvious the issue of infrastructural gap, the need for healthcare, primary healthcare in the case of Nigeria and all that. And I think it becomes even more obvious that the government alone cannot handle this. So how do we now attract, attention, especially investment from the private sector or otherwise, to close this gap?
All right. Thank you so much. First of all, you've said a very critical thing. Government alone, and across the world, government alone cannot fund healthcare. And it's more obvious in Nigeria when you look at last year's budget and this year's budget. So this year was, because of the pandemic, made the greatest statement to say health budget has to go up. So if health budget doesn't go significantly up in 2021, when can health budget go up? But you see just a marginal increase, just about 4% of budget, of the total budget, the total envelope is what is budgeted for healthcare.
What does that tell us? Does that show that the government is even giving any serious attention to this all-important sector? I mean, you operate
in the health sector. So I'll say it is what it is. Government says, of course, it has to service debts. Government says, and it's obvious, decrease in revenue. So government pretty much cannot give what it doesn't have. So these are statements, these are clear statements that there has to be closing of the funding gap. It makes a clear statement that the private sector needs to be involved. So it is what it is. Pretty much government doesn't have the money to increase funding of healthcare, and it's across all these sectors.
So how can the private sector begin to take this opportunity that COVID-19 perhaps has presented?
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chimeze, for that question. So the private sector, prior to COVID-19, private sector has been doing a lot. Again, private sector, the COVID-19 has exposed a number of opportunities. You will see what CACOVID is doing, supporting the government. Something that, again, needs to be done more is that private sector needs to also partner with private health sector. That's something that I think we want to see. So PPPs have been going on across Nigeria. That's a very, very important way of private sector involvement. Where in Lagos, although you might say this is Ogun State, LUT as the biggest, largest cancer center in West Africa. That is a PPP, funded or supported by NSIA, Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. So those are examples of private sector involvement in healthcare.
You also talked about private sector collaborating with private sector. Now, how can that be explored? Because if we're looking at the government and it seems perhaps we are doing the much that we can, Then let's look the other way. How can that be explored?
Okay, so that is something that I think it's really important, needs to happen. So there's an incentive for the private sector, banks, telecom, oil and gas, to support government. Possibly, it might attract patronage, it might attract tax holidays. But I think what needs to happen more is private sector, banks, telecoms, etc., supporting private health sector, pharma, hospitals, medical equipment. And I'll give a very example during the COVID. We're still in the COVID era.
Yeah.
One of the isolation centers that was set up in Ikeja GRA by somebody in the private sector. So it was supported by people in the private sector. So private sector partnering with private health sector. So equipments were donated, and that isolation center was set up in Ikeja GRA. Channels, for example, channels can say they want to support hospitals, and for example, in those hospitals, don't watch CNN or Al Jazeera. I'm just giving an example. So that is an example of private sector supporting private health sector. That is something that needs to happen more.
We're having private sector, and private sector is the issue of pricing, which is why we always put in the government, because health is one major thing. So if you have private sector and private sector, doesn't it take the price out of the reach of the ordinary man?
Affordability now, because that is key. Healthcare affordability is key, because when you have, it's just like having education in the hands of the private individuals. You have to pay through your nose to send your child to school, and so you have the healthcare system, which is now becoming very, it's now being channeled to private sector. See a lot of private individuals or in their hospitals, and then you find that even an ordinary Nigerian can't even afford to take his or her child or himself to the hospital for treatment. How do we deal with that? I mean, healthcare affordability is very key.
Without a doubt. So Chimeze, this can potentially bring costs down in some respects. So for example, an oil and gas company says, I'm supporting this Nigerian pharmaceutical company, private sector to private health sector, and says all your anti-malarials, right, will come branded with maybe our logo, and the cost comes down, right? So that's private to private. For example, an hospital, a private sector player buys equipment and says that room, that building should be named Channels Building, right? So you get brand awareness. Companies come to advertise on channels, right? So why can't they say, so that there's brand awareness for them? So they brand all the hospital, and they say that care is supported by this IOC or by this telecoms company. So potentially cost can come down. I know Chimeze is particular about cost. Yes, such partnerships, such collaborations can bring about reduction in cost.
Where does health insurance come to play here?
Excellent. Thank you once again, Chimeze. So health insurance is really, really, really important. When we look at the health sector, I usually like to say there's a demand side of healthcare, there's the supply side of healthcare, and there's the environment where we all operate, when you talk about ease of doing business. Health insurance is critical for developing the market, which is the demand. So you're an investor, if you're bringing in money, of course, ROI, you want return on investment. So health insurance is what can deepen the market, make people be able to pay easily. You can say off-takers. So health insurance is critical.
So what about the individuals? Talking about skills now, I mean, we have some brilliant doctors, who work here, and now look at what is happening in the health sector. A lot of them gone on strike, and then you find a lot of them wanting to leave the shore to, for greener pasture elsewhere, and then you have a lot of people, traveling abroad for health tourism. How do we begin? Because human capital development is key. And I think if we invest in our medical doctors,
without a doubt,
the nurses, that would also help. But don't you think so?
Without a doubt. So I'll tell you a joke. I watch football a lot, and I joke with people. If Messi and Ronaldo were Nigerians, they probably wouldn't play for Nigeria. They probably wouldn't play Nigeria. They probably be playing for another country. And it's sad when you look at it. And that's what at times happens to the best of us. Those we have Nigerian doctors all over the world, the US.
Doing very well. And we're not encouraging them here. I mean, it's so sad, really.
People that are returned, some that are returned are expressing their frustration. some that have tested the waters, put their leg in, some have run back. So again, some of this, you look at the environment, and government has a role to play in this environment, making giving an enabling environment, making it easier to do business. So if you're talking about investing in the supply side of healthcare, whether you're building an hospital, building a pharmaceutical company, you're not going to operate in isolation. You're going to operate in an environment which is regulated by government. And hopefully we'll be able to talk about that more.
Now, you are the chairman. You are the chairman of Lagos Chamber of Commerce Healthcare Group. It's an advocacy group. So what kind of advocacy do you do? You're a medical doctor. You play in that sector. You know the challenges in that sector, and you know the importance of attracting investment. And then being the chairman of an advocacy group, what conversation have you been having with government?
Thank you so much. So let's assume we've got all the money to bring into supply side. We want to build hospitals. And indeed, people are building hospitals. People are building pharmaceutical companies. We operate in an environment. In that environment, you've got government. You've got customs. You've got NAFDAC. You've got SON. So NAFDAC, fantastic organization. They're safeguarding our health, right? But at times, they don't totally understand this sector. And there's no problem at times when you don't understand something. It's not unusual. You need to try and gather or gain the knowledge. All this influences the cost. So, for example, with customs, you have people, some of our members, bringing in ventilators. Ventilators, they're critical for people that can't breathe.
At a time like this.
With COVID and things that have difficulties in breathing. Now, because a ventilator, for example, contains parts like compressors, right? Things that should be waived, right? They're being told because it contains that's one of the components of a ventilator. So they're being told they need to pay the same tax because compressors are found in cars, right? So those are part of the challenges. Also, you find duplication of responsibilities, things that have been passed by NAFDAC. You are being told there's opacity, right? There's no clarity. At times you don't know what to even do, right? And you find we're talking about reducing medical tourism. So how are you going to be able to reduce medical tourism when some companies don't even want to touch Nigeria, right? Because it's difficult for them. Some of this equipment, we don't manufacture them. CT scan, etc., etc. So when there's uncertainty with government, there's uncertainty of COVID, and there's uncertainty with government, nothing is clear. There's no clarity. Haphazard. It doesn't do well for investment.
So now, how do we relate this conversation we're having with what is going on now, which is that the resident doctors have been on strike and it doesn't seem like we see the end in sight? How do we're talking of the health sector and in a pandemic for that matter?
So it's really, really sad. I know Channels has had the president of NAD earlier, the president of NMA and etc. I wouldn't really talk too much on that, but as a citizen of Nigeria, right, it's deeply saddening. It's deeply saddening why we have to, come here again. I personally feel if there are agreements, that have been signed probably at a point in time, those agreements need to be respected. Beyond being respected, those things need to be implemented.
So looking at this sector now, any hope? What should we be expecting? I mean, having been talking to private sector and talking to government, what do you hope to see?
All right. So supply side, that is our work. We want to do supply side. We hope demand side. Government needs to fix demand side in terms of health insurance. Health insurance is at about 5%. It's been like that for a while. Government needs to fix that. We need to scale up health insurance. More people need to be covered because that, activates the market when people don't have to think about paying when they want to access care. So demand side needs to be fixed. In terms of health insurance, HMOs, for example, one thing, so this might sound a little bit controversial, but what I think regarding HMOs, there are too many of them. I think there has to be consolidation. There are over 50 HMOs. I think there needs to be consolidation, making bigger, stronger HMOs that can innovate and expand the market.
And the doctors should be paid.
Definitely, Chimeze, definitely.
Thank you very much,
Thank you so much.
Dr. Niyi Oshamilui. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a break, and when we come back, FX Commodities Market is next.